Good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 14. We are counting down the weeks at this point, right? 14, 15, 16. We are almost there. I hope that everyone is doing okay. You're hanging in there. A couple of things before I go into the module for this week. I am almost done with essay number 2, so I will finish that tonight probably, and then tomorrow I'll release them all. You'll notice a few things pop up in the module that isn't there right now. You'll notice a little quiz that will ask you about the hidden Miller. We'll ask you about word count and whether or not you're thinking of revising, what your feedback is, all of that. You'll also notice a page about the revising process, just to remind you what it means to revise. You won't see that in the module right now, but all of that will populate tomorrow once I release all the feedback. So again, just as a reminder, your feedback is in 3 places. Well, 2 places technically. The first is on your Google Doc itself. You'll just see a few comments, again, real sparse. But the other 2 pieces of feedback, excuse me, you'll see actually on Canvas. The first, when you go to grades and you click over to write essay number 2, you'll see 2 little icons. The message box icon, click on that, and that will actually give you my comments and the evaluative feedback. That is high pass, passing, not yet passing, or incomplete. The other little icon that you'll see looks like a clipboard. Click on that. That's the rubric that shows you kind of where you landed in each of those categories. One thing I do want to say about those of you who have received an incomplete, I had quite a few incompletes because people didn't meet the source requirement. Again, on the assignment sheet, it tells you really explicitly what that source requirement was, that you needed evidence from homegoing and you needed like textual evidence, meaning you needed quoted material from homegoing and quoted material from at least one source, either from your annotated bibliography or something else that we had discussed. So the large majority of folks who have an incomplete, it's because of that. So just make sure, especially as you're heading into essay 3, that you're familiar with those assignment requirements, because essay number 3 can't be revised. Again, we'll talk more about essay number 3 next week. But essay number 2, I wanted to just say those words. Last note, sorry, about essay number 2 is that you have 2 weeks to revise. So I'm handing it back tomorrow, which means you have until, sorry, let me make sure that I have all my dates in a row. So tomorrow is May 3rd, which means you have until May 17th to get the revision in. So you've got 2 weeks from when I hand it back. So you'll be able to get your essay number 3 done and out of the way, and then you can revise essay 2 after that if you choose. You can revise essay 2 this week if you would like. Meeting with me is a requirement. Again, there's going to be a page in the module you'll see pop up tomorrow, with all the details about revision. Okay, I'm done talking about essay number 2. Okay, the week, sorry, this is last week's. All right, week 14. You'll notice that the beginning of week 14, this module is all the same stuff that was in last week, right? All of this preparing for essay 3, there are no new readings here, okay? I just reposted them so that way if you didn't read them last week, you'll be able to read them this week. What's new is the poetry. So last week in the Discord assignment, what I asked you to do was to go to the Poetry Foundation, pick a featured poem, and just talk about it, right? One thing that was really interesting in reading all the Discord feedback was just how much you all have been taught, I guess, and I was too, to kind of beat the meaning out of a poem. And I think that there's a really fine balance between doing that and just coming to hate a poem and hate poetry in general, to really kind of learning how to look at the words and look at what a poet is doing with the line, and really kind of being able to see the difference between analyzing the heck out of it so that you hate it, to kind of appreciating what the poet's doing in the same way that we kind of appreciate what Jesse is doing in Homegoing, right? It's just on a much smaller scale, much more granular. When you're looking at a poem, you might have 20 words versus, 200 pages in a book. So anyway, last week was more of a general, let's talk about poetry. Let's just read poems and just enjoy them. But now this week we are going to kind of move a little bit closer towards what I'm asking you to grapple with in essay number 3, which is kind of O'Brien's concept of story truth and happening truth. And so what I've done for the poems this week is I've kind of given you 4 historical events through poetry that I thought would be really kind of interesting to think about in terms of what O'Brien has to say. Again, going back to this idea of story truth and happening truth. So there's a group of poems here about the pandemic. There's a group of poems here about September 11th. There's a group of poems about the genocide in Rwanda. This was in 1994. And a group of poems written during and after the Holocaust. The pandemic poems are written mostly from U.S. poets, some of whom contracted COVID-19, but most of whom are just writing during that time. One of whom was, you might recognize her if you watched the inauguration of Joe Biden, Amanda Gorman. She was the young poet who recited a poem at the inauguration. Anyway, so those poems come from her new book called Call Us What We Carry, which, if you like poetry, I strongly recommend it. The September 11th poems, this page will direct you to a different page where there are poems from at least 100 different poets. Again, many of them based in the U.S. And I don't know that I would necessarily call them survivors, although there are a few survivor poems in there. Survivor poems from the September 11th are very hard to find. So I didn't try to differentiate those as much. But in the Rwandan genocide poems and in the Holocaust poems, I did make it very clear whether or not the poet was someone who had survived that event. And the reason that I did that is because I want you to kind of think about what, if any, difference there is between someone who is writing about it who was not part of the event versus someone who's writing about it who was part of the event, in order to kind of sit back and think about this idea of what Tim O'Brien is saying between story truth and happening truth, right? And so that's basically what I'm asking you to do in your Discord this week, is to choose one of these categories of poems, or you could read them all. It doesn't matter to me. I'm asking you to just kind of to choose a category that is maybe interesting to you, or maybe that you don't know a whole lot about, and just read some of the poems and then engage on Discord about what you notice with respect to what O'Brien is saying, story truth and happening truth, right? This is the synthesis, right? And I know that that can be difficult, but it's the good stuff. And you're doing it so exceptionally well in essay number 2. I'm really, really proud at you all for the efforts that you're putting in there, because the essays they're just really, really solid. And that's basically what you're doing this week, is working on it towards essay 3 and working on your Discord for this week. Writing territory, of course, also. There's nothing new that will be given to you next week in week 15. There's no more content. And the reason is because you have a vast amount of content available to you, right? You have all of Unit 1, you have all of Unit 2, and then you have all of this poetry here in Unit 3. And the last essay prompt, as you've read, if you have read it, is asking you to consider any of that, or all of it, or whatever you feel comfortable with tackling, and kind of not talking so much about the single story, not talking so much about perspective, not talking so much about power, but thinking about story truth and happening truth, using that as your lens. And maybe you do want to talk about single story or power or perspective, and you can do that. But the focus now is to think about this concept here about truth and storytelling and who tells the story, right? You'll see that all of these themes that we've been working on all semester, they all are kind of connected, but they're different, right? But some of you we're able to go back and talk about single story in essay number 2. You'll find in essay number 3 that you're like, oh yeah, I want to go back and mention single story. Great. That's not the focus of this essay, but can you include it? Of course, absolutely. So for those of you who are beginning to wonder, like, at what point are we done learning new stuff? This is it. This is the week that you're done learning the material. Week 15 really is just about the writing. So I'm going to have extensive conferences all week long in advance of your due date at the end of week 15. So yeah, so this is kind of it. Yeah, I feel like I was going to say something else, and now I can't remember what it was. I'm having a human moment here. All right, anyway. Essay number 2, return tomorrow. I have conferences. I don't have as many conferences this week, but next week I will have a flurry of conferences. So if you can't get in this week, don't worry. Reach out via email. Next week I will have a bunch of conferences available. I hope you all have a good week. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. And that's it. All right, everyone, take care. You're almost there. Hang in there. You're almost done.